We're going to take a good look at our canoe, and we're going to first work out what's wrong with it. So this here is an open canoe, or here in Australia is often referred to as a Canadian, an open Canadian, and as we industry professionals like to refer to it, it's a divorce machine. Now here's the reason why. Many paddlers find on their very first experience paddling a canoe that it's often not met with very much success. It's met with lots of frustration, lots of aggravation, lots of arguments, hence the divorce machine or the best friend breaker. We want to take a look at why that is, because we don't want people's first experience in a canoe to be their last experience in a canoe. So let's take a look at why so many people find much more success in their first time paddling a kayak as opposed to a canoe. So first and foremost, a kayak is usually paddled with a double-bladed paddle, so you're providing equal amounts of power on both sides of the boat when you paddle, as opposed to the canoe where we use a single-bladed paddle, and you have ideally two people on opposite sides of the canoe providing uneven amounts of power just to one side of the canoe at a time. Also, kayaks are usually quite streamlined with a very flat hull shape, meaning that they want to track straighter in the water. They're often accompanied by a nice steering mechanism at the back called a rudder, which allows you to point your toes and control the direction of your kayak. So you can see why instantly people find that to be a much more rewarding experience. Now our poor old helpless canoe here is usually powered by two people paddling on opposite sides, and as I said, they have an unequal amount of force or influence on the boat's direction. Let's take a look at why that is. So we want to take a look at why the paddlers in the canoe have different roles. First of all, let's identify with this boat who sits where. This is the bow of the canoe up here, and this is the bow paddler's seat. And the reason we know that is because this cutout here in the yoke identifies the front of the canoe up there. This is the stern paddler's seat, so there's the stern or the back of the canoe. So this point here is actually the exact middle of the canoe in terms of its weight and balance. This is our central pivot point. So if you think of the canoe as balancing on that point, the ends of the canoe are the furthest points from there, which are the places where you have the most leverage on turning the canoe. Now let's take a look at the bow paddler's seat using my precise tape measure here. The bow paddler's seat is approximately this far from that central pivot point. If I turn this over, the stern paddler is approximately this far from that central pivot point. So the stern paddler has that much more leverage or influence on the pivot point of the boat, and therefore they are always going to overpower their bow paddler. Now there's an even more complex concept, which won't go into too much. We'll just explain the word and you can look it up yourselves. It's called the peripatetic pivot point. Peripatetic pivot point. And all that means is that when a boat is put into forward motion, this theoretical pivot point here actually drifts forward, which is now giving the stern paddler that much more influence on the boat's direction. So in paddling terms, when two people are in a canoe paddling forward, the bow paddler is the person who needs to provide the forward momentum and the cadence to which you both paddle. The stern paddler has the role of trying to keep in time with the bow paddler and also controlling and fixing the boat's direction. Because of this reason, many people don't understand that a canoe requires different roles, paddling on different sides, and there's a huge repertoire of strokes needed to make that happen successfully. And therefore they get in a canoe, they can't go straight, they fight, they hate it, and then they go home and they buy a kayak. The stroke we want to focus on now is arguably the most important stroke in the entire repertoire of canoeing, mainly because it's the foundation stroke and the stroke that we use most in a day's paddling, and we're talking about the forward stroke. So getting the forward stroke right means that you should be using the correct muscles and the correct body position so that you're not as tired at the end of the day as you would be if you didn't know how to paddle properly. So if you think about through the course of a day, a novice paddler might take 10,000 paddle strokes. If you're paddling properly, you might be able to cut that number down to as little as 7,000. Sound good? Here's how it's done. This stroke will not let you go straight, but it will propel you forward. We'll work on straightening out later. Here's our forward stroke. as you can see, the stroke doesn't make the boat go straight. It simply just lets it go forward, which is what we want to look at. So how did I do that forward stroke? Let's break it down. So first, my body is facing forward and upright. I'm slightly angled to the side on which I'm paddling. With my arms as straight as possible, I'm reaching out, placing the blade in the water as far forward as I can, aiming to have a vertical paddle shaft, which means both of my hands need to be outside the canoe. I'm using my abdominal muscles to pull the paddle through from as far forward as I can reach back to just about my hips, where I pull the paddle out and I reset and I take another stroke. So we'll take a look at that again. I'm facing the side on which I paddle. My arms are relatively straight. I'm reaching forward and placing the blade as far forward as I can, rotating my body forward. I'm using my torso muscles to pull through, keeping a vertical paddle shaft, and I finish just beyond my hip. So we worked out that the forward paddling stroke is nice. It makes our canoe go forward, but you also have already noticed now that it doesn't go straight. And again, that's because the stern paddler is sitting further from that central pivot point. They have the majority of influence on the direction of the canoe. So the first corrective stroke we're going to look at for fixing the direction of the canoe is called the stern rudder. This is going to help you go in a straight line, and here it is. So how did I do the stern rudder? Essentially, the back person in the boat, the stern paddler, I do my forward stroke and I continue my forward stroke past my hip. I allow the blade to trail back toward the back of the canoe. That's where the turning happens. My indicator thumb, the thumb on my top hand, points upward to the sky, which makes my blade vertical in the water, and I push the blade slightly outward, which will bring the canoe back toward my paddling side. I'll show you again what that looks like. I do my forward stroke, I look where I'm going, blade continues past my hip, indicator thumb points to the sky. My blade is now traveling vertically through the water, which means I can push away slightly, turns me toward my paddling side. So, we're going to learn a turning stroke, which is going to be used for various things, but right now we're going to demonstrate how you can use it to spin your boat in a full circle in its place, as if you ran into the bank and you need to do a 180-degree turn to pull away from the bank. It's combining the forward and the reverse sweep strokes, and here's what it looks like. So, in order to do that stroke, what we did was first we paddled in time. And if paddling straight, we aim to paddle close to the boat. If we want to turn, then we aim to paddle far away. So we're paddling out as wide as we can. Now we're both paddling in a certain range between the tip of the boat nearest to us. So Steve, if you can point to the tip. I'm pointing to the tip of the boat nearest me, and we finish at our hips, which is at 90 degrees to the boat. And if we both paddle tip to hip or hip to tip, it means we're doing the opposite on opposite sides, which will make us spin. So the sweep stroke is essentially paddling wide, using your core muscles, paddling in the range either between hip tip or tip hip, and aiming to stay together, which will cause you to spin in circles. As a tandem pair paddling together, your goal should be to look good. It's very important, we want to look good. Now in order to look good, there's a couple of things you want to adhere to. Main thing is paddling on opposite sides and paddling in time with each other. Now the bow paddler sets the paddling cadence. The back person has to try and keep in time with them. If you're not happy with the time, with the cadence, then you need to communicate. So, being a good bow paddler means that you want to be able to take a stroke, slowly recover and bring your paddle back toward your next part of your stroke, so that the person in the back has time to paddle, steer, and then keep in time with you. So the certain parts of the paddling phase are called your catch, where you reach forward and you catch water, your power phase, where you paddle through, and your recovery, where you bring it back to start your catch phase again. So we want to have, as a bow paddler, a really nice slow recovery so that the person in the back has the chance to keep in time with us whilst they're doing a little bit of the steering stroke. Now another thing we can do to make ourselves good, solid forward paddlers is to keep what we call a low recovery angle. We're feathering our blade into the wind so that if we have a headwind, exposing this surface area of the blade is a lot of wind resistance, which actually slows us down. Again, we're thinking like lazy paddlers. So as we take our paddle stroke, we have a low recovery angle, a nice vertical catch phase, power phase, finish at the hip, low recovery angle, and plant again.